My husband of 31 years died on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. No storm outside, no meaningful last words. He just didn't wake up. The hospice nurse came at 6:37 in the morning, and by 7:15 she was already on the phone with the funeral home. I sat in the hallway outside our bedroom in my bathrobe, holding a cup of coffee I'd made out of habit, and I thought, this is the moment everything changes. I was right. I just didn't know yet which direction the change would come from. My name is Lorene. I'm 64 years old. I taught third grade for 26 years at the same elementary school in Decatur, Georgia. I know how to manage a classroom full of 8-year-olds who haven't had breakfast. I know how to stretch a dollar and negotiate a parent-teacher conference and stay calm when everything is falling apart around me. I'm not a fragile woman. I want you to understand that before I tell you the rest of this. Walter and I bought our house in 1997, a 4-bedroom colonial on a quiet street, back when the neighborhood was just starting to turn around, and we got it for a price that now seems almost embarrassing. We paid it off in 2018. Through a small party, just family, a few neighbors, a bottle of champagne Walter had been saving. He was so proud. Free and clear, he kept saying. Lorene, we own it, free and clear. After he passed, I looked at everything carefully. The house, the savings, a small investment account Walter had built up over the years, steady and quiet the way he did everything. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life, without depending on anyone. My son, my only child, is named Brandon. He's 36, works in IT, lives about 40 minutes from me in Alpharetta. We've always been close, or at least I believed we were. He called every Sunday, came for holidays, helped me with yard work when Walter got too sick to manage it. I trusted him completely. Mothers do. He got married 2 years before Walter passed. Her name is Simone. No, wait. I need to stop myself. Her name is not one I'll be using in this story, because this story isn't really about her name. It's about her intentions. I'll call her my daughter-in-law. That's enough. I had concerns about her from the beginning. Small things. The way she'd redirect conversations. The way she spoke over Brandon rather than to him. Once at Thanksgiving, she interrupted me mid-sentence 3 times, and when I looked at Brandon, he just smiled like everything was fine. I told myself I was being difficult. Mothers-in-law always think no one is good enough for their sons. I knew that. I tried to be fair. For the first 8 months after Walter died, I was fine. Sad, achingly sad, in ways I still don't have words for, but functional. I kept the house, I cooked, I went to church on Sundays. I started a small garden in the backyard that Walter had always wanted but never gotten around to. I planted tomatoes and marigolds, and I talked to him while I watered them. Then my daughter-in-law started calling more, not to check in, to assess. I could tell the difference, though it took me a few calls to name it. She'd ask about the furnace, about the gutters, about whether I'd had anyone look at the deck. It seemed a little unsteady last time we were there, Lorene, and I'd hate for something to happen. She said I'd hate for something to happen with a concern in her voice that never quite reached her eyes. Brandon started echoing her. Mom, the house is a lot to manage alone. Mom, have you thought about what happens if something breaks? Mom, what's your plan? I didn't have a plan. I was 8 months out from losing my husband. My plan was to get through the week. The first real conversation, the one that made my stomach tighten, happened in February. Brandon came over alone, which should have been a comfort but wasn't, because he sat at my kitchen table with his hands folded in front of him the way he used to when he was 12 and had something to confess. He said he and his wife had been talking. He said they were worried about me. He said the house was 4 bedrooms and I was 1 person, and didn't I think it was time to consider something more manageable. Manageable, I said. Smaller, he said. Maybe a senior community. And just hear me out. You could sell and put the money somewhere safe, and we could help you find a nice apartment closer to us. I looked at my son, at this man I had raised who had taken his first steps in the hallway right outside this kitchen, who had cried at his father's funeral in a way that broke my heart open. and I said very calmly, "Brandon, I am 64 years old and not moving into a senior community." He nodded. He said okay. He went home. I thought it was over. I began to pay closer attention after that. When they came for dinner in March, I noticed my daughter-in-law walking through rooms in a way that wasn't casual. She paused in the doorway of the living room. She looked at the built-in shelving Walter had added in 2009. She asked offhandedly if I'd had the house appraised recently. I said no. She said, "Oh, just curious. The market is wild right now." She smiled at me. I smiled back. 2 weeks later, Brandon called to tell me they'd spoken to an estate attorney. Just to understand the process, he said. Just to know what the options were. He said the attorney had mentioned that sometimes when an older parent is living alone in a large asset, his words, large asset, it made sense to restructure things to protect everyone. "Protect everyone," I said. "Protect you," he corrected himself. I asked him what restructuring meant. He got vague. He said they could talk about it more when I was ready. He said there was no rush. I heard his wife in the background, not speaking, just present. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the bed I had shared with Walter for 31 years, and I stared at the ceiling and I thought, I know what this is. I am a school teacher. I spent 26 years watching children try to hide things in plain sight, and I got very good at seeing through it. My daughter-in-law wanted this house. She had decided that a 64-year-old widow living alone in a 4-bedroom paid-off colonial in Decatur was an inefficiency she intended to correct. And my son, my sweet, good-natured, conflict-avoidant son, was letting her lead him somewhere he might not fully understand he was going. The next morning, I called my friend Paulette. Paulette is 68, a retired nurse, and the sharpest woman I know. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she said, "Lorne, call an attorney. Today. Not next week. Today." I called that afternoon. "His name is Gerald. No, I'll call him my attorney. He came recommended by a colleague from church who'd used him for her mother's estate." I sat in his office on a Thursday with a yellow legal pad and wrote down everything he said. He explained my options with a patience that reminded me of the best doctors I'd ever had. Thorough, unhurried, treating me like I was intelligent. We talked for 2 hours. There are things I won't share in full detail, because they remain private legal matters. But I'll say this, by the time I left that office, I had a plan. A real one. Not the plan my daughter-in-law was drawing up. Mine. Over the next 6 weeks, quietly, I restructured my affairs. The house went into a trust. The investment account was repositioned. I updated every document that needed updating. I did it without telling Brandon, which felt strange. I'm not a secretive woman, and I don't like keeping things from my child. But something had shifted. I wasn't sure anymore which version of my son I was talking to when I called on Sundays, the one I raised, or the one his wife had been working on. I hated thinking that. I want you to know it cost me something to think it. In April, Brandon called to ask if I'd be willing to sit down with a financial advisor they knew. He framed it as a gift. They'd pay for the consultation, just to give me some peace of mind. I said I'd think about it. I bought myself 3 more weeks. Then in May, they came to the house on a Saturday. I'd made coffee and put out a small plate of the shortbread cookies Brandon has loved since he was a boy. My daughter-in-law sat across the kitchen table from me with a folder in front of her, and I noticed her hands were very still. Composed, rehearsed. She said they'd been doing a lot of thinking. She said she wanted to be direct with me because she respected me. She said that, at my age, managing a home this size alone carried real risks. Liability, maintenance, isolation, and that the financially responsible thing would be to liquidate the property while the market was strong and place the proceeds in a managed account that Brandon could help oversee. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were printed pages, information about senior living communities, a sheet from a real estate agent with estimated sale prices in my neighborhood, and a document I recognized as a financial power of attorney form with several fields already highlighted. I looked at the form. I looked at my son. He was looking at the shortbread cookies. "Brandon," I said. He looked up. "Did you know this folder was coming today?" He paused just a fraction too long. We just want to make sure you're protected, Mum. I picked up the power of attorney form. I read through it slowly, the way I used to read permission slips from parents, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. Then I set it down, very gently, and I folded my hands on the table the way my mother used to when she meant business. I appreciate the thought, I said. I do, but I want to tell you both something. My daughter-in-law leaned forward slightly, expectant. About 8 weeks ago, I said, I met with an estate attorney. I've restructured my finances. The house is in a trust. The investment accounts have been repositioned. Everything is documented and managed. There is nothing here that requires oversight. The room was very quiet. The power of attorney you've highlighted for me to sign, I continued, would give Brandon authority over assets that are now held in trust. It wouldn't be legally effective for the purpose you're describing. I paused. I had my attorney explain it to me specifically. My daughter-in-law stared at me. The composure she'd walked in with, the stillness, the rehearsed calm, developed a small crack right at the edges. I'm not senile, I said. I'm not lonely enough to be desperate. I'm not so grief-stricken that I've stopped thinking clearly. I'm a 64-year-old woman who taught school for 26 years and raised a good son and paid off her own home. I looked at Brandon when I said that last part, and I handled my affairs because I'm capable of handling my affairs. Brandon's face had gone through several expressions during this: surprise, confusion, something that might have been relief, or might have been shame. I couldn't fully read it. My daughter-in-law closed the folder. She said, after a moment, that she was glad I had taken steps to protect myself. She said it in a voice that was trying very hard to sound gracious and didn't quite make it. She said they only wanted what was best for me. I know, I said, and I left it at that. They stayed another 30 minutes. The conversation moved to other things. Brandon's job, a trip they were planning, whether I'd seen the new plants coming in at the garden centre down the road. It was surface level, all of it, and we all knew it. When they left, my daughter-in-law hugged me at the door, with arms that were slightly too stiff. I stood on the front porch and watched their car back out of the driveway. Then I went inside and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Walter and I had eaten 30 years of meals, where Brandon had done his homework, where I'd graded papers on Sunday afternoons. And I let myself feel it, not triumph, not satisfaction. Something quieter and more complicated than that. Something close to grief, actually, because none of this was what I'd wanted. I had wanted to grow old in my home and have my son call on Sundays just because he loved me. I had wanted things to be simple. They weren't, and pretending they were would have cost me everything. A week later, Brandon called. Without his wife in the background, as far as I could tell. He was quiet at first, just making small talk, and then he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I waited. "I think I let myself get convinced that I was doing the right thing," he said, "that it was about protecting you. But I think maybe I wasn't asking the right questions." "Which questions weren't you asking?" I said. He was quiet for a moment, about whether you actually needed protecting, or whether you'd already handled it. I told him I'd handled it. "Yeah," he said, "I see that now." We talked for a long time that evening. About his father, a little. About what Walter would have said about all of it. I didn't say it out loud, but I knew. Walter would have been furious and then quiet, and then he'd have said, "Lorene, you did right." About what Brandon needed to figure out about his marriage, which was between him and his wife, and not my place to dictate, but also not something I would pretend wasn't a real issue. I told him I loved him. I told him that didn't change. I also told him that my home and my finances were mine and would remain mine, and that any future conversations about them would happen with full transparency and no prepared folders. He said he understood. I believe he did. It's October now. The tomatoes are long finished, but I left the marigolds in, and they've gone rusty and gold the way they do in fall. And some mornings I sit on the back step with my coffee and look at them and think about how much can change in a year without any of the big things actually changing. The house is still mine. I'm still here. The street is the same. The built-in shelves are the same. The sound the furnace makes when it kicks on at night is the same sound it's been making for 15 years. And I know it's not a problem. I just know how this house breathes. I'm not angry at my son. I'm watchful, in a way. I didn't used to be, and that's a loss, but it's an honest one. And I'm not angry at my daughter-in-law. Exactly, though I've thought carefully about what I am. I think I'm clear-eyed. I see her. I don't think she's evil. I think she made a calculation, and it didn't account for the possibility that I'd already made mine. Here's what I want other women my age to hear. Because I know you're out there, some of you in houses you've lived in for decades, some of you newly widowed, some of you watching your children's marriages change the shape of your relationships in ways you didn't expect. You are not fragile. Being older does not make you manageable. Grief does not make you incompetent. And the most powerful thing you can do, not dramatic, not confrontational, just powerful, is handle your own affairs before anyone decides to handle them for you. I didn't raise my voice in that kitchen. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't make a scene or send an angry text or call a family meeting. I just sat across the table from a prepared woman with a folder and said, I already took care of it. That was enough. Walter always said I was 3 steps ahead. He meant it as a compliment, though sometimes it drove him a little crazy. I'd like to think he was watching on that Saturday in May, from wherever he is now. I'd like to think he saw the folder get closed. I think he would have smiled. I've thought a lot about what made that Saturday morning go the way it did. Not the legal documents, those were just paperwork. What I keep coming back to is something simpler, the months I spent paying attention when it would have been easier to look away. There's a version of me that doesn't make that phone call to the attorney. That tells herself she's being paranoid. That convinces herself her son would never let anything bad happen. That version of me signs the form, or at least hesitates long enough that the pressure wins. I understand that version. I was close to her more than once. But here's what I've come to believe. After 64 years and a marriage and a career and a grief I'm still working through, the outcomes in our lives are rarely accidents. Not in a mystical sense. I mean it practically. What happened at my kitchen table in May happened because of decisions I made in February and March and April, when no one was watching and nothing felt urgent yet. The folder my daughter-in-law slid across the table had no power because I had already moved the pieces she was counting on. Cause and effect, action and consequence. It's not complicated, it's just quiet, and most people don't notice it until it's too late. What I didn't do was wait to be rescued. That's the part I want to say clearly. I didn't wait for Brandon to figure it out on his own. I didn't wait for someone to notice I was being maneuvered. I didn't wait for the situation to resolve itself. I called Paulette. I found an attorney. I asked hard questions and wrote down the answers. I did the thing that needed doing while there was still time to do it. That's not toughness in any dramatic sense. Walter was tougher than me in a lot of ways. Paulette is louder than me, funnier, quicker with a sharp word. What I have is patience and the willingness to think 3 steps ahead. I used it in the classroom for 26 years. I used it raising a child. I used it, finally, to protect what Walter and I built together. I think about the women who won't make that call, who will tell themselves they're overreacting, or that it's too complicated, or that it's too complicated, or that surely their family means well. Some of them do mean well. Brandon meant well, or some part of him did. Meaning well and doing right aren't always the same thing, and waiting to find out which one you're dealing with is a risk I wasn't willing to take with my home. The house is still mine. The marigolds came back this spring without any help from me. Some mornings I sit on the backstead and I think about what it cost me. Not the legal fees, but the trust I lost in certain silences, the way I listen differently now when Brandon calls. That's a real loss. I don't minimize it, but I'm still here. And that is, in the end, the only thing that matters.